In my last video, I showed how to prune your vines, including your secondary vines, your tertiary vines, but one thing I did not talk about was the actual layout of the vines. So I'm going to go over that today. So when you first plant your pumpkin, you're going to plant it at the edge of your patch. I made a rough outline of a patch here in this black border. My patch is 30 feet by 30 feet. If you don't have that much space, just work with what you got. So I plant my seedling at one end of the patch, and as the seedling grows, you're going to have what's called the main vine, and the main vine is just going to go straight down the patch. Now, coming from the main vine, it's going to start developing those secondary vines coming off. I train them perpendicular to the main vine. And these secondaries will just keep coming and coming. So you keep training them perpendicular, and it fills up the space nice. Now, when you're pruning your plant, you're pruning off those tertiary vines. The tertiary vines are the ones that would come off the secondaries, and you don't want those because those will just take up way too much space and be super annoying. So you're going to go all the way down, prune, secondaries going all the way down. Then at some point you're going to have an actual pumpkin show up. In one of my videos I will show you how to train your vine to accommodate the pumpkin, and essentially what you're going to do is once you see the little pumpkin forming, you're going to start curving your vine to accommodate the pumpkin. And the pumpkin is going to be right here. The reason you train that vine is because if you didn't, say the pumpkin was over here, as it starts growing, it's going to grow into that vine and cause issues. Versus if you have a nice area here where it's curved, the pumpkin has more room to grow. So we have that S curve. And then we have these secondaries before the pumpkin, and the closer they are to the pumpkin, the more it's going to feed the pumpkin, or so we think. So this one I just drew right here, that's the last secondary before the pumpkin, but there's actually also a secondary vine that develops directly at the pumpkin. And if you can train that around the pumpkin, that would be great if you could keep that vine. Sometimes you could keep it on the same side as the pumpkin, sometimes you kind of have to curve it and have it go on the other side. So do whatever you can to keep that secondary vine if you can. I usually keep it on the same side and curve it around, and I let this one grow indefinitely. And depending on where the pumpkin is in my patch, I will do whatever I have to do in whatever shape to get this to grow. The other thing I'll do is the last two secondaries before the pumpkin, I will let the tertiary vines grow to fill in any remaining space. Sometimes I forget and I accidentally prune them off, but we want as much vine as possible, especially in those two secondary vines before the pumpkin. And even this secondary vine over here, I'll let this one grow as much as it can. Once the pumpkin starts really growing, the vines are just going to shut themselves down and slow down anyway. So the plant will kind of tell itself when to stop, or tell you when to stop. But I try my best to get my entire patch filled up, and that's a basic way to do your vine layout. There are growers who do it completely different and still have huge pumpkins. So there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to do it. This is just how I do it, and it's worked well for me. Now, as for the area after the pumpkin, a lot of growers do things differently as well. Some people get rid of the main vine completely after the pumpkin once they know that the fruit has definitely set. The reason being is that it's felt that most of the weight brought onto the pumpkin is coming from all those secondaries and tertiaries before the pumpkin. Some people keep that main vine going, as you can see in this picture. Some will do the main vine but not let any of the secondary vines come off of it after the pumpkin. Some let every other secondary vine continue after the pumpkin. It's all personal preference. Again, everybody does it different, and a lot of people still grow big pumpkins doing it either way. The thought process for keeping the main vine going after the pumpkin is they say that the tip of the main vine secretes growth hormones that go back to the pumpkin to tell it to keep growing. So that's something to consider. But again, there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just many options.